Welcome, Rob. There's Tasha.
Ladies and gentlemen, here's your host, the author of Chief of Staff, Tyler Paris.
All right, thank you, John, and welcome everybody to our 5-day Chief of Staff Challenge, where in the next 5 days, for half an hour each day, we're going to give you some tools and tips for some of the most common challenges that Chiefs of Staff face. And in 30 minutes, I'm going to give you one immediately applicable tool, tip, framework, something that helps you do your Chief of Staff job better, so that by the end of these 5 days, you should be adding value in 5 new ways for your exec and leadership team. And as a bonus, if you attend all 5 days and participate, you can't just sit in the back and window shop either. I'll send you a certificate and a signed copy of my Chief of Staff book. The idea in these 5 days is really just to give you a taste of what we cover in our Chief of Staff Mastermind Cohorts, where we cover additional topics like these, and we dive even deeper into these topics that we're going to cover. And in the cohort, you get the added benefit of more interactivity, group coaching, and a monthly one-on-one coaching session, as well as peer review, which we'll sample a little bit this week, most of those, except for the one-on-one coaching. There won't be as much of that, but real quick, here's 60 seconds, mostly from participants themselves, on the value of the cohort.
Hi, Tyler Paris here. I'm so excited to kick off our 4th Chief of Staff Mastermind Cohort, a year-long learning cohort that combines the power of Chief of Staff specific training, group and one-on-one coaching, and peer advisory. Don't just take my word for it, why it's an awesome learning opportunity. Take it from participants themselves.
I really enjoyed participating in the cohort this past year. It was a great opportunity to learn and grow from my peers.
I get great energy from making connections like these, where we support each other.
I'm excited to be part of this cohort and be amongst my peers.
And it really helped me encourage my leadership team to have those tough conversations with folks we didn't want to leave.
It was amazing how much we had in common despite coming from completely different industries.
Overall, it's a win-win for everyone if you get involved in the cohort. I definitely recommend it.
Enough said. Don't miss out on astronomical ROI. Sign up for Cohort 4 today and become the leader your organization needs and you want to be.
Awesome. Thanks for sitting through that with me. If you've been to any of our events, you know that I like to give each person the chance to check in and connect with the group. We're going to have like 50 people here today, so in half an hour, I can't really do a round robin, but the way I'm going to do that today is have you drop in the chat, just real quick, your organization and one aspect of your Chief of Staff role that if you could better scope it and get clarity on it, in our session on scoping the role a little more clearly, which one of those would make the biggest difference for you and your working relationship with your exec or the leadership team? So go ahead and drop that in the chat. I'll spotlight some of those as they come in, and we'll go from there. Welcome, Chris. Welcome, Jessica. Jessica, Annie, Madison, Richard, Laura, Sandeep. So many folks joining. This is awesome. I am super excited about this.
Again, go ahead and hit the chat. Chat your organization and one aspect that could have better scope or clarity in your Chief of Staff role. What would it be? Manzi in the house. Tyler?
College track, change management. Yes. Okay, good. fractional chief of staff for multiple principals. Best way to identify delegation opportunities. Excellent. Amazon resource planning. Scope of goal tracking throughout the year. Okay, life sciences, integration, and strategy planning. Leap Cure, people ops, culture building. Excellent, excellent. Canvas, chief of staff to the CEO, designing conversations with leaders to drive quicker decision making. Ooh, good. All right. Philadelphia 76ers, chief of staff for GM, VP, strategy and vision, deeper insight into principals, challenges. Okay, cool. We're going to cover a little of that today. I think that's going to be good. A lot of these I think we're going to help you get at. Alexa, building efficient strategy. Okay. We've still got a few more. All right. There we go. We got Amy, Director of Operations for the Office of the President. Strategic planning and communication. I'm seeing a theme. There's quite a few on strategy, planning, maybe efficient strategy. So
I think that's a good collection we got there.
Yeah, we're going to go ahead and come back to those in a minute. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Tyler Paris. I'm a former corporate chief of staff. I'm pretty sure I've researched and written more than anyone in the world on the chief of staff role. I've built the chiefofstaff.expert community, which is now more than 1,200 strong, with chiefs of staff from small, mid-size, and enterprise companies, nonprofits, government. And as another point of introduction, for those of you who don't know him, I'd like to introduce the illustrious Chen, CEO of Engaging Virtual Meetings and author of a book by the same name, as well as a conference by the same name. And John has become a partner of mine in producing this event. We'll talk a little bit more about why this coming Wednesday on day 3, but for now, we're going to dive right in. So here's how the chief of staff role often works. And it might relieve you to know this. It might not help much, but I'm going to share it anyway because it's so common. But a CEO knows that they need help. They're not sure exactly what kind of help, so they hire a chief of staff role to kind of figure it out as they go. And that works out pretty well, a surprising amount of the time, actually. They're smart people. They figure it out. But here's the thing. It takes the average CEO, chief of staff tandem 9 months to get clear on how the chief of staff role can add maximum value. In fact, as recently as last week, 80% of you said that you've asked your boss for more direction and not gotten it. And so, this is just really interesting. And I'd love for 2 or 3 people to raise your hand if this describes you, and give us just in 30 seconds or less why you think your boss might not give you direction when you ask for it. Or even if it's not you, just throw out some ideas for why you think that might be.
Again, if you click reactions, raise hand. If your camera's on, you could just wave your hand.
Yeah, you can.
Let's say we got John.
Hey, John.
I think a lot of times it is because they don't know themselves, potentially.
Good call. They don't know themselves. That's right.
Thank you, John. Anybody else?
Nancy's got her hand up.
Here we go. Let me bring Nancy up. Nancy has her camera off. Go ahead, Nancy.
Yeah, I think they're basically hiring you because they want to delegate the task to someone so they won't answer it for you.
Absolutely. You're the one being delegated to, right? Yeah.
And we got Taylor. Taylor Murphy, go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, I think they just want you to think strategically and kind of find that vision that they're looking for. So they want to empower you with the decision making.
Excellent. Empowering you to figure it out on your own. That's really cool too. So one of those was delegating almost because they're just so busy, they don't have time to think about it and get the clarity. The other is they want to empower you to get to that answer, which is a bit more intentional perhaps, right? So those are really great. Yes, these are busy people. That's why they hired you to bring proposals and solutions. And that's going to tie into our kind of main methodologies today. But if your boss gives you zero time and won't even have the conversation with you, that's probably a red flag. There really can be no partnership if you're not spending any time together. And I don't know that we can get into all those dynamics today, but you'll probably never have, on the other hand, as much direction as you feel comfortable with. So here's a few questions that the coach in me would ask, say in a one-on-one coaching session with you, which would be, number one, how much clarity do you need in your current situation? Because there's really an argument to be made between sort of flying by the seat of your pants or analysis paralysis on two ends of an extreme, and somewhere in the middle where you're likely to land, how much clarity is enough? And number two is, why do you need that clarity? If nothing's falling apart and everything seems to be going smoothly, is it really something you want to spend your time on? Thirdly, who or what is the source of that clarity, which kind of goes to this question of delegating, the CEO delegating to you or you going to them. Thinking about who the source of clarity is or could be can be really enlightening for you. And then fourth, what's your role in getting that clarity if you need it? And if you're not getting it so far, what's your role in getting it? And then what clarity can you get? So for everything else, there could be an opportunity for you to get comfortable with that discomfort of not knowing. And if you're stuck on that, I might do some work with you to find out, well, what's going on for you there? Like, why do you need a greater level of certainty than you feel like you're getting today? And so I don't expect you all to have answers for that today. I don't expect you to chime in and tell us your deep, dark secrets or anything like that, but just take those questions with you and don't look now, but you just got group coached, which of course, as we're talking about the cohort, that's one of the ways that unfolds. But having asked those questions, I'll say this: 9 months is a long time for your execs, direct reports, or other stakeholders to be confused about who's doing what or how the role functions and interacts with them. John, you want to hit the next slide? Yeah, there's that slide about expectations. Yeah, the expectations are the same. They're just really different. Not having clarity for 9 months and instead having, sort of missteps and resistance and other things along the way, it can make your exec look disorganized. It can diminish their leadership credibility. And that's really hard to rebuild once it's gone. So you want to get off to as good a footing as you can. And then, John, finally, the last slide there is, it also generates a lot of uncertainty about how much and why the leadership team need to work through you as an intermediary for certain things when maybe they went directly to the exec before, or maybe they went more frequently, or with a different cadence without an intermediary, or that kind of thing. In lieu of a narrative from the exec about that, they will fill in the gaps with their own stories. And that time of uncertainty creates what I call the wedge effect. Rather than bringing your exec and leadership team closer together and moving more like a team together, it drives a wedge between them. And you get caught in the middle of that. And that might answer part of that question we asked earlier about why you need clarity. Some of the answers might be in there, but you want to get as clear as you can as early as possible, even if you may never get the full clarity you're looking for. on your job scope and swim lanes, at least at a high level, so that you can then communicate what clarity you do have to those stakeholders around your exec who are going to interface with you. And that could be your senior leadership team or their direct reports, could be the board, could be investors, whoever that is. And if you take a proactive approach and some thoughtfulness, you can really scope the role with an appropriate level of detail that adds real value, not just for you and your exec working together, but for all those other stakeholders and your partnership with them for the betterment of the organization, which is what we're really after. So even in a well-scoped chief of staff role that's been in place for a while and has a lot of expectations around it, the role can evolve over time. So maybe you're not as certain today about aspects that you once were clear about. Maybe things have changed a little bit. And there can be inflection points throughout your tenure where you revisit the assumptions of what the CEO and their team need from the chief of staff role. And then you adjust that to accommodate unfolding realities. So whether you're new to the role, whether the chief of staff role is new to your organization, or you're at an inflection point for a role that's been around a while, we're going to focus today on ways to get at least some clarity on how your role can add the biggest value and make the biggest difference for the exec to all those things you chatted about a little bit ago. So let's just take a minute. I'd love for you to chat for me two things. Number one, what is a strategy you've used to try and scope your chief of staff role or better define the working relationship with your principal executive? And for bonus points, if you want to throw in that a number or throw a number on top of that, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the best and 1 being the worst, how would you rate that approach? Was it successful? Did you fall flat on your face and chalk it up to a learning experience? Just go ahead and drop those two things in the chat for us, and I'll highlight some of those as they come in. First is, what's the strategy you've tried to use to get a little more clarity on different aspects of the role? Second of all, is a 1 to 10 assessment of how it went. Welcome, Daniel.
Tyler, what's a strategy that you used that either worked or didn't work? You mean like me just telling them what to do doesn't work?
Exactly.
Here we go. First chat from Rob.
Appointment charter. It makes explicit what is often left implicit. Good, and that's an 8 or a 9. Excellent. Thanks for sharing that, Rob. Still trying to define the scope. Yep, through conversations about items that are not the best use of their time that you could take on. Yep. Scheduled and ad hoc meetings with the president. Yep. 6 for the most part. I have to say, so far, Amy's best describes my experience as chief of staff. If I were to throw one in there, yeah, it was maybe a little more reactive than I felt like it could have been. Alex says, creating a project snapshot in a spreadsheet with descriptions of the project, the role, and what my success would look like for each. 7, good. Deliberate conversation where I define the buckets and time allocated versus buckets and assessment is an 8. Yeah, okay. Got it. Both prepared role expectations, ownership outline, reviewed live together. Probably an 8 or 9 for effectiveness. Excellent. Annie wrote and presented a scope of work doc. Research through Google and interviews. Framework.
I love the range is like 2 to 9, Tyler.
Yeah, you rated that a 4. Helpful to kick off dialogue, but find that I end up swarming hot items. Okay. Yeah. Define roles and responsibilities, ever changing, and write high level scope of what the company looks like with a successful chief of staff. 7.5. Okay. Yep. I like that point about ever changing. You know, it evolves, right? It's not a static position. So you got to stay flexible. John says just asking questions and having good conversation about it's maybe a 5 or 6, but pretty reactive. organic conversation that's ongoing as the role is new to the organization. 6.78. I love it. That's a very specific number. That's awesome. I don't know if it was supposed to be a 6-7 or 8 or something like that, but that's really great. I love that. So we'll just leave it as it is because that's classic. Regular conversations and advocating for projects, good 6 to 7. Sharing interesting articles that you found helpful. Great. These are all awesome. Thank you for sharing those. Again, if you don't have all the clarity you want in the world, that might be great, and honestly, 6 and 7s might be good enough. So back to that question is, how comfortable are you with that remaining 3? And is there a business case for making it clearer? But let's talk about it for a minute, because a lot of companies just copy and paste a chief of staff job role, or they'll go out on the job boards and they'll copy and paste snippets from lots of different postings and say, yeah, this sounds about like our role. Let's just throw those in there. And maybe that works to help fill your talent pipeline or get some folks in the door for an interview, but maybe that's what you responded to and when you got your job, and maybe your employer was much more thoughtful about it. It's hard to say, but at some point, pretty quickly, candidates and you all are going to have questions way beyond the job posting. You might have those questions right now, and we've seen those earlier. And so now that you've shared some of your strategies, I'd love to share 2 strategies. One comes from just repeated interviews I've done with chiefs of staff over the years. And gosh, I don't actually have a great count at this point, but I know it's more than 1,200 interviews with chiefs of staff at this point. The other method, so there are 2 strategies. One is one that I've just picked up from all the interviews I've done and kind of how people went through this. The other is something that we developed just for our mastermind cohort. And these all help you better scope that role or have the conversation with your exec. So number 1 is what I'll call the 2 pie charts. And I saw variations of this in the chat a few minutes ago, but it's really the 2 pie charts is the cruder, faster way to get that role clarity and definition that you can then use to align expectations and all that stuff. If you've read my book and the chapter ending worksheets or activities in it, you might be familiar with this. Basically, you whiteboard with your exec 2 pie charts. Now, the first one, and John, just keep it here for a sec. In the first instance, you ask them, what percentage of your time do you spend on different tasks or in different areas? And they can guesstimate. And I've put it on a nice little slide here, but this is a whiteboard exercise with them. You can do it on a Mural or Miro or whatever tool you want to use online. You can do it physically, however you like to do it. They can guesstimate, or you can use a time tracking app over a week or 2 and put some actuals behind it. However you want to track that. But in the second pie chart, you ask them, where do you most need to be spending your time? So there's where are you spending your time versus where should you be spending your time? And there's almost always a delta between those 2 pie charts. And in those delta areas is an opportunity for you to have a conversation. And so, John, you can go ahead and click through, because this is where you get to ask your exec, for the work that's holding you back from getting you where you want to go, could it be done by an existing member of your leadership team or direct reports? Why or why not? So for each of those items, you make your exec think it through and decide. And if they're having a hard time, then you make the recommendations. So here's where I'll say, if you were hired to be a strategic advisor, then advise, right? So it's funny, sometimes we forget that when we're looking to the exec for these points of clarity. And I think we'll talk Thursday a little more about some questions you can ask to get them to get you information that you're looking for. But in most cases, for a lot of those delta areas, the answer is going to be yes, someone on the existing leadership team can take it on. So they'll delegate that out to the CFO or the head of sales or the product team or whoever, and they don't need to necessarily keep that on their plate. But for others, maybe the CEO doesn't want them distracted from their main priorities. So the answer is no. I realize you don't all work for CEOs. When I say CEO, I'm kind of using it interchangeably with principal executive. So just think of it as your principal executive. And maybe they don't want their leadership team distracted from the main priorities. So they'll say, no, I want you to go and pencil out whether this merger or this acquisition makes sense for us right now. And you'll have to work with the CFO a little bit, but I don't want him spending more or her spending more time than X on it. So those delta areas that are not best handled by an existing member of the leadership team are some of the areas where you can add value for the exec and the leadership team. And then those are the areas you can develop a lot more clearly. So that leads us to the second strategy. And this is the gold standard for scoping the chief of staff role, and that's what I call value stream mapping light. And before I dive into that, we remember that conversation about asking your exec for clarity and not getting it. This is a tool you can use to get that clarity and to get them to react to something where you're bringing them a solution or a proposal and they can react to it. So even if it's not perfect, it's kind of getting you in the right direction and letting you have the conversation you need to. So, what I've seen a lot of times, and in most cases, if you've been waiting for clarity, you'll keep waiting. So, giving us the clarity we want might never bump to the top of their list. And, one exec said to me early in my career, bring me solutions, not problems. So here's how we're going to do it. Many of you might be familiar with value stream mapping because your company might do it with customers to gain feedback on existing products or experiences with your organization. But the idea is simply that you identify a primary stakeholder. And when you do it with customers, it's probably a specific customer and maybe even a specific profile or persona of customer. But for our purposes today, it's going to be your principal exec. Second, you identify and name the value generating touch points where you have an opportunity to add value for that stakeholder, whether it's a board or regular leadership team meeting, a process that you oversee, an annual offsite or an all hands, a regular or ad hoc interaction with vendors, suppliers, regulators, financial analysts, the press, whoever those stakeholders are. Whoever and wherever your exec plays, find those touch points and ask yourself if you can add value there. If so, this is an item to put on the list. You can always prioritize and sort through it and filter it out later. But third, for each of those touch points where you could potentially add value for your exec, you want to list 3 to 4 bullets of the activities that you would do in those touch points that add the most value. So you might start with 10 bullets, but you might want to whittle them down to the most important so you can always focus on the most important work. So John, can we cue up our example? So if my example is the primary stakeholders, my boss, the CEO, and my value generating touch point is the weekly executive meeting, some value generating activities for my CEO in the weekly executive meeting could include logistics. Like the stakeholders need to know why we're meeting, who's going to be there, what they need to bring, where to be and when. So logistics is one way I could add value. Facilitation is another. So we've got to have a structure and clear expectations for the conversation. How are we going to elicit different points of view? How are we going to generate debate and have a healthy debate? How are we going to set ground rules for the conversation and how the decisions will get made? Especially where it's expected to be contentious, or we know there's going to be some conflict. It's worth noting that sometimes execs want to drive that facilitation work themselves because they recognize there's a lot of power in that. But sometimes they want to be really present in the conversation and they want someone else focused on the structure and the driving and the logistics. So you can think about that. And then finally, who signed up for what, by when, the RACI and other clarifying agreements. So it's that what, so what, and what now of the meeting. Somebody who synthesizes the information at the end of the meeting and really, gets that in front of them. So you can put that value stream light, and I'll call it light because value stream mapping can be a month-long process or a weeks-long process. You could do this in an hour or so, and you can put that in front of your exec and use it as the basis of a discussion, right? To say, these are the touch points. These are the places where you are. These are the places where I see us needing, where I see me needing to get involved and add the value for you. Here's how I think it could go. And here's what my strengths are to bring on that. And then you you cue that up for them so that they can react to it. So even if you're not bringing the solution, you're bringing some possibilities to them that maybe they haven't thought about, that they get a chance to react to. Okay. So now I realize we're almost over at the end of our time, and actually I was going to have you do an example. I think we might have spent more time highlighting the chats than I was expecting, honestly, but that's okay. We'll come back to this. So that's value stream mapping light. You could probably knock that out pretty quickly so that you know what you're working on. You and your exec can communicate about the role and expectations to the rest of the team and their direct reports, and your leadership team to know what those expectations are. So there you have two tools that you could use to start getting at scope clarity, role clarity, and scope, so that you can add the most value, be the most effective, and improve your working relationship with your exec and your exec's leadership team. Now, I hope that you've gotten something of value from that today. I'd love it if on your way out the door, and I realize we're at the end of our time, if you could tweet real quick, just one thing of value you've taken from this chat.
And while we do that, Tyler, we have the Chief of Staff Cohort 4 link in the...
Yeah, perfect. So, if you thought this was a kind of conversation that you could take and run with, and you could make some hay with, honestly, some of the chiefs of staff in our cohort have said that this exercise alone paid for the cohort, because it enabled them to get better alignment between the exec and the leadership team, to really clarify some of those areas that they wanted to be driving more, but didn't get to, didn't get clarity on early on. So, if you're getting value out of this, these are the kinds of things we dive into in our cohort. We spend a lot more time on them. We do examples. We have, I can review them with you. We go back and forth and do the brainstorming. I'd love to have you join me in the up to 40 chiefs of staff who are coming in this year, so you can find your tribe and feel like you're not doing this all on your own. If you'd like to talk more about it, since we're out of time, I'll drop my link and my calendar link in here if you want to find a 15-minute slot. And I can answer any questions for you. And then for those of you joining us by Zoom, I'm going to stick around for Q&A for a little bit if you want to stick around. For everyone else, I bid you adieu and great rest of your day, and we'll see you tomorrow for another packed half an hour.
Thank you. You've been in Tyler Paris's 5-day Chief of Staff Challenge. Be here tomorrow at the exact same time for the next stage and the next challenge of the Chief of Staff.